Lawsome by ConsultWebs. Breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello, everyone. Today on the show, I'm talking with Matthew Stewart, partner at Kraft Associates based in Dallas, Texas, where they serve clients in the areas of personal injury and Social Security disability law. Matt and his firm excel in the area of productive and proactive communication within their firm and outside the firm. And they found that that is a key differentiating factor in running a successful law practice today. Matthew, I've been looking forward to this discussion. Thanks for joining the Lawsome Show today.
Happy to be here.
Let's start for our listeners with more of just basic definitions for you specifically. How do you define productive communication within a law firm?
Well, we've got communications with clients, communications between and among the staff. Most listeners, I guess, talking to clients is more sticking points are because you're dealing with maybe more of a one-off situation. You've only got a finite amount of time with the client before the case is over with and their file is closed out. So an employee or a partner that you're with, you're going to deal with them over a longer term. So you have lots more time to refine that communication as you figure out where that person's coming from. But with a client, at the beginning anyway, trying to figure out what questions or areas of concern they have so that you can formulate your communication style to them. A refined client might have very specific and low-level needs for a lot of detail, and a very unsophisticated client might need a lot more explanation, a lot more hand-holding. So at least at the beginning, trying to kind of figure out by letting them answer open-ended questions will give you a sense of what your communication style or it needs to be with that particular client, because they're letting you know, they're showing their hand. Hey, there's very basic things that I'm going to need time to get comfortable with, and that's totally fine. You should be able to size up every client that way and let them tell you what they need.
I think that's the big piece of it in the early stages, is just simply knowing who you're communicating with. I wanted to follow up with that question specific to characteristics or key characteristics that you are often on the lookout for. When it comes to, you mentioned just the style, basically the stage that someone comes in their understanding of the particular practice area, and opening up, I guess, with some of these open-ended questions, as you suggested, to gain a sense of really where are they at in this journey, and catering conversations and communication to that. Are there any other characteristics that you're on the lookout for in trying to identify, how to approach communication with a client?
Sometimes more written communication is helpful, and sometimes more verbal. If you've got a client that's pretty good at following written instructions, hey, send me this every month, and they seem to be doing it. The informal call or an informal email might be all that's needed to continue that communication. Someone who's repeatedly doesn't seem to be following through on some things that you asked them for might still need the phone call, but they might need some from beyond open-ended questions, you asking more direct questions about, is there something going on that's preventing them from, being able to pay full attention to their case? Because as a client, they're a participant in the process, and as advocates, we're needing ammunition from the client, which is usually information, if not documentation, and we can better do that if we know what they're struggling with. Totally understandable why clients are not giving always their complete focus to the case. Their lives often are in chaos. So just understanding what their points of chaos are in their life will help you better be able to ask better questions. If you know that they're going through a divorce, going through a bankruptcy, and moving from one place to another to live, you're going to be a little bit more patient with them and a little bit more able to suggest things that their bandwidth to be able to respond to open-ended questions is really limited, because they got so much on their plate that they're going to just need more hand-holding, and you need to try to discover facts like that so that you can be a better advocate.
There's so much wisdom to that. The old adage stands out to me of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And to me, that's they have your clients, they have the liberty to choose virtually any law firm in the area. It's up to them. And by being able just to communicate, human to human, and showing someone that you're truly interested in their issues, their struggles, I believe that's where the relationship really begins to blossom, if you will. And it's a good segue, at least, into the impact of effective or productive communication. So let me ask you this, Matt. If communication is the channel through which an organization's culture is influenced, how has applying productive communication influenced Kraft and Associates law firm's culture? How has the culture been impacted within the firm?
Well, if the communication is going well and the case goes well, I find it all comes back to me in spades, because my staff, my very experienced staff, gets and deserves the compliments that come from the clients. And it's I'm more of the person who comes in at the end, and maybe I catch a touchdown pass sometimes. We wish it happened all of the time, but the true credit often needs to be given to the staff and the staff's ability to communicate well with the client, because oftentimes I am unavailable, and they need to be able to communicate well with all members of my staff who have decades of experience, and I'm happy to brag on them whenever I'm given the chance to do so. I'm happy to tell my clients that even though I'm not always available, because I might be doing another hearing, or I might be just tending to other parts of the business, that my staff has my confidence and that they can feel comfortable talking to them on almost any question, because they have so many decades of experience that it should go as well talking to them as it does with me. Although I'm happy to talk to them for clarification, anything that they're unclear about, I want the client to feel like they're in good hands with my office, and not just me, but the people that work for me, and that I couldn't do what I do without them. So if the client walks away at the end of the attorney-client process, it's over with, the case is concluded, that they can feel comfortable bragging about my staff, and if necessary, referring a friend or family member to us for help, and they can do so with confidence because they've been there and done that, and they know what they're talking about.
Would you giving credit where credit's due is a powerful thing, and obviously can and will impact culture positively within the firm. People want to know that they're appreciated, that their work is appreciated. And I would suggest, I'd go so far as to say that, Matthew, you're a positive individual. That probably comes natural to you. Maybe it doesn't, but I would assume, just in what I know of you, that giving compliments and sharing credit is something that's more of a natural personality characteristic to you individually, but any advice you would give listeners who may struggle with that, whether it's driven by personality or roots systems or whatever it may be? What would you share to someone, who may have struggled with giving credit or taking time to pat someone on the back, if you will, within the office?
Well, I think that if you try it for a while and you're not making it up, you're genuinely um, feel like that the person who is there on your staff is a reflection on you, that by them looking good, you both look good, or that by the two of you looking good, the firm looks good, that they at some point in the analysis there's very little difference between who you hire and who you have working for you and in your office, in your firm's reputation. At some point it becomes all the same thing. You're part of it, of course, um, but giving the credit away where it's appropriate to do so does help the client to feel better. And I'm not just talking about placating the client. I just want them to genuinely feel like there's a reason that this person has my confidence, and there's a reason that this person has worked in my office for decades, and it will serve you better, and um, you'll get less of the calls that you don't need to be getting if you can effectively do that. It only helps you because you only have so much bandwidth to focus. And if your client and your employee, your staff, feels like they can handle most issues, you'll get back that free time that you need to focus on where you can really contribute, um, and where your efforts are going to produce the most benefit. What's what we all struggle for with is the right bandwidth.
And that's every business owner, right? I mean, it's like there are always you're spinning plates constantly. There's always something in the air you're juggling, and taking time for something like that doesn't always feel like it's tangible, or at least the results are tangible. But what I'm hearing is that you've seen that, you've seen it, you've seen the impact both on clients and internally with your staff. It all works together. And that's the big piece I'm hearing. I think for listeners, what about the practical side? So let's pivot a little bit, Matt, and go into the aspect of communication. And from your experience in working with clients, are there any particular communication channels you use to ensure productive communication between your staff and your clients? And whether that be, obviously you mentioned telephone, email, text, or there are other platforms that you found are really good for communicating between the two parties?
Most law firms, we got physical addresses and phone numbers and alternate phone numbers. Could be a family member's number, spouse's work number, email address, um, cell phone numbers. Uh, we we give ourselves so many ways to get a hold of a client that when we're having trouble getting a hold of a client, at some point we're just going to simultaneously try all methods. We'll leave the voicemail, we'll send the card, we'll send the email, we'll call the neighbor, all within 10 minutes of each other. And if we hear radio silence for long enough, we get concerned because we really don't. We've really tried all avenues, but um, sometimes if I'm trying to anticipate a conversation that I'm trying to set up with a client, maybe it's a meeting, and I notice that we have periods of time where we're not hearing from them. I might try somewhere on a Wednesday or a Thursday midweek, just a sort of general email, saying, just wondering how you're doing. And that way they've got a few days to respond to me. And if they want to respond to me at 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday night, that's fine. That may be the easiest thing for them to do. And I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but I use all of those things. and handwritten communication on stationery to clients too, just to try to keep that communication going. And usually it's a single focus. Like, I just want to know if there's something going on with their health or medical treatment, that I'm asking a fairly specific question in addition to a general question about how they're doing, because I want to know the answer to both. And they've got a lot on their plate, so I try to keep it pretty easy to respond to me and pretty specific, because sometimes that's enough, is just to focus on one or two things.
And it goes back, to the earlier part of this conversation where you said it really depends on the individual too, in catering communication style, whether in brevity or in a lot of, depth, to their personal needs and preferences. Those are all important things. Communication is something where we're talking about productive communication within the law office. And I've heard it said before from actually multiple attorneys over the years that there's no such thing as a perfect case. There are always going to be some, what do you want to call it? Cobwebs in the closet, if you will, of a case. So, that's going to force some difficult conversations potentially. So what are some of those common tough conversations you've had with clients, or maybe speaking just generally to how you've handled those potentially difficult conversations to help overcome some of those issues and lead with, productive communication, ultimately leading to a good outcome between you and your client?
Yeah, it's a natural thing to wonder if you're on the other side, and if you can imagine yourself as being not the overly sophisticated client, but just average sophistication client. And the natural thing to wonder is, when's this thing going to be over with, and how's it going to resolve, if it's going to resolve in my favor, and not seeing why it's so difficult to resolve it or resolve it quickly, and being able to explain in terms that make sense to a client how common it is for their kind of case to proceed exactly along the same course that theirs is taking. And even though it doesn't necessarily make it right that it's taking as long as it takes for an insurance company or a government agency to respond, it's nonetheless a function mostly of institutional sticking points that even well-intentioned adjusters are perhaps dealing with, or well-meaning government employees are still in a larger system. And to understand that we're not capable of changing that system, but we have to work within that imperfect system, and that their case has particular areas that make it less than perfect. And like you say, every case has those. Even a case that appears to my eyes to be, quote, perfect, doesn't necessarily, it does not, my view of its perfection is not necessarily shared by someone on the other side. And that, the older I get, the more I recognize that that's just my reality, that there is, I should not expect perfection. I should not expect anyone to perceive what I'm bringing them as a perfect case, but trying to stop looking for perfection, I guess, is the hard part, because it's not there.
I think that's another big piece too, is just, being realistic, because nobody wants to be told something and then later learn, it was something completely different. Obviously, you jeopardize a relationship there, you jeopardize trust. And the same thing works within the office. We've kind of gone back and forth between communicating productively externally with clients, but communicating internally, we've stressed the importance of that as well. And there are a few factors that we've seen are critically important for productive communication within the business in terms of influencing culture. A few things would be, and we've touched on this, but just giving feedback effectively. Now, that could also be negative feedback in certain instances, or critical feedback to employees, but doing so productively in a way that leads to a positive outcome within the firm. And I'm going to come back to these, but just to touch on the other two, one piece would also be building trust. Being a key leader within the law firm, Matt, you have a real a responsibility and in terms of being able to communicate to build trust and make changes or make new implementations within the firm, and making sure in those changes or those evolutions within the firm, you're still maintaining trust with your staff and the management team. The other piece would be, we've talked on it, but making changes. Those are frustrating. When you mentioned that the longevity of your team within the office, and I know that's one thing that truly stands out with Kraft Associates. You all retain employees for a long, long time. They're loyal. And there's a reason they're loyal. It's how you're productively communicating on and on. But let's touch on these three areas for a moment. Starting with the giving feedback effectively. Do you find that there's a certain best practice that you follow, even if it's more of like a to-do? Is it that rigid for you in terms of being intentional with productively giving feedback to your team members? Or do you find that it's much more authentic and natural?
It's probably a hard question to simple answer to, because I worked with my staff up here for so long before I became an owner that I'm almost twice the age now as I was when I came here. But so that I know exactly what they're capable of. With a newer employee, you have to really have what the Buddhist monks call beginner's mind, because you become blind to what you know. You take many things for granted, and you forget how naive you were decades ago and how little you knew, and how that you've onboarded so much knowledge and things that you take for granted, that the new employee doesn't take anything for granted because they don't know. You don't have your decades of knowledge. So trying to remember what it was like to not know everything, not that I know everything now, but I know a heck of a lot more than I did decades ago. And recognizing that the employee may be reluctant to raise a question because they don't want to look like they don't have the knowledge, but by definition, they can't have the knowledge that you have. And that's sitting down with that new employee and letting them ask open-ended questions and letting you address them, so that they can deepen their knowledge of, well, why do we do it this way? There might be a very long answer to that question or a very short answer to that question, but institutional knowledge is ingrained at every level. And literally, there's a reason why we and the staff that has been here for decades do things a particular way. Is we know what it's like when we don't do it that particular way. And so therefore, we've all been sort of educated through the school of hard knocks. And when we don't do it this way, there's blowback that we don't like. So we've all sort of agreed from now on, we're going to do things this way when it comes to handling, say, a new case call, or handling someone who's particularly unhappy, who's a client. And here's how we deal with those things in-house and how we try to minimize it. And getting the new employee or the newer employee to understand those things it's a process of everyone with the knowledge giving their 2 cents worth of opinion, so that the new employee is introduced to the cultural and the way of thinking in the firm and how we came by that knowledge.
That's, I think, naturally kind of leading into the second piece on building trust within the law firm. A lot of what you're saying naturally does that. When you can come, you're almost vulnerable. There's some vulnerability aspect there as a leadership team to be able to be open with team members and say, challenge certain standard operating procedures or how we do things. And we'll talk openly on why we do it and what we've learned in getting to where we are. That naturally builds trust in and of itself. But have you found there any other strategies or best practices that you followed to intentionally build trust within the firm?
I think if clients are happy with, the ideal situation is clients happy with the firm and is willing to write, testimonials and things. I encourage the client who's inclined to do that to mention the staff and actually brag about the staff in their review, because the staff deserves to hear it. And I think clients that are considering hiring a firm want to know what that former client also thinks about the staff as much as the lawyer. So giving the credit to the staff where appropriate, and usually it is appropriate, helps give them confidence that they're doing the right things and to do more of it.
Let's wrap up with any particular tips that you found that would be helpful for our audience, specifically about positively influencing culture. And obviously we've talked about productive communication. How does that all tie in together? Any particular tips that you would have for listeners?
I think that every firm's leadership has to strike the right balance between the good cop and the bad cop. And the good cop is always trying to recognize the employees and the staff's continued loyalty and efforts and make them want to do more of it. The bad cop is, the person who wants to come down when things don't go perfect. And I think it's always good to give yourself some time to think about it if you ever feel like you're coming down on too hard, too much on one side or too much on the other, because a lot of times when I feel like I'm feeling that way, it's usually a few days of settling down is all I needed. And I've got a trusted partner, law partner, and a trusted office manager that between the three of us, I'll say we do a good job of getting it right. And we don't all have the same perspective on things, but we hear each other out, and it makes it go easier when you're working with people whose opinions you trust, even though you may see a situation differently. Initially, you're getting the perspective of people who've earned your trust, and hopefully you've earned theirs. The support staff is encouraged to continue their loyalty and their hard work because they feel like they've got management has their backs, and they need to feel like we do. That's important.
I agree. It's critically important, and firms struggle. They struggle so severely in trying to find that perfect balance and really surrounding themselves with trusted mentors, trusted colleagues, that they're willing to hear perspective that may not directly align with theirs, but ultimately allows the firm to move forward stronger and be better because of it. Matt, I'm grateful for the time you've shared with us here. For those that are interested in contacting you or reaching out, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
MSTEWART at kraftlaw.com. Kraft with a K, like the macaroni and cheese.
And say that phone number one more time.
214-999-9999.
Thank you, Matt. We appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
Lawsome by ConsultWebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next Lawsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.